Thank you very much, Michelle. Michelle said she's willing to take a couple questions, and since I did pay for the sandwiches, I will get to ask the first question. It's kind of a general question, but what do you think the prospects are for immigration, depending on who gets elected? And I mean, just sort of your crystal ball bloviating. I'm sorry. Is this? I don't know if this is on here. Why don't you just use this one here?
Obviously, if Hillary gets elected, God forbid it, it'll be business as usual. This is someone that Barack Obama called the senator from Mumbai. So there you have it from Obama's lips himself. I am hopeful, but I always try to manage my expectations. If we get a Trump White House, obviously I'm hopeful because many of the people that I most admire and respect on these issues have Trump's ear. And when you have people in Trump's inner circle like Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions and Chris Kobach and Phyllis Schlafly, I'm encouraged, but I think that it behooves supporters of strict immigration enforcement and sane immigration policies to hold a Trump administration's feet to its fire. And obviously, if you're in this room, I mean, it's also clear that building a wall is just the beginning. And I think that's most clear, especially to people who have served in the rank and files of immigration enforcement. And obviously, that was much of the message of invasion, that it's not just the physical borders, but it's every aspect of immigration enforcement, the front door, making sure that we have the right people who are not snoozing in consular offices or not doling out special preferences to people who pose us risks and dangers, and the enormous amount of work that needs to be done with regard to turning around the deportation abyss. I said that I had this special obsession with both people, politics, and policy, and every aspect of particularly of deportation policy is dysfunctional. So hopeful, but holding my breath.
Good, thank you. Anybody have any questions? Yep, go ahead. Just speak up and I'll repeat it if necessary, because I'm not sure how many microphones we have.
I think one of the underreported stories are people that are naturalized citizens that came in legally, and I've spoken to many that are against just open borders, and that doesn't. I think the assumption in the press, in the major media, is that everyone that came into the country is for open borders. And I know that isn't the case. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, for the last 25 years, I've been speaking out on behalf of children of naturalized Americans who, reject this idea of open borders, and I think we're seeing more of that now. Partly, I think it's a pushback, and I think in this election cycle too. Now you're seeing there was a video that went viral over the past week of Latinos for Trump. And actually, every time I travel in an airport, I'm stopped by people who want to give me their entire immigration story, and then harangue me for not being pro-Trump enough. So there you go. But I think that even there, though, you have to be very careful because as John and I have pointed out and sold out, I think all of these foreign guest worker programs have been greatly exploited. And I think that a lot of times you have one particular strain of open borders Republicans who tend to want to lump anyone under the nativist category who wants to put more restrictions and wants to be much more careful about how these foreign guest worker programs are operated.
Neil? Speak up so everybody can hear.
A question I bumped into by accident the other day. In California, the Democrats have achieved their goal. They used immigration to lock up a complete majority. Now, how are Democrats looking back on this, and are they having second thoughts? They got what they want with political power. Now, do they want to in any way restrain immigration or change it to offset other things that might happen? The reason I say that is partly because one person I know out there said among the Democrats I talked to in California, there's more willingness to restrict immigration now. Because they look around and say, I don't like this, I don't like that. And they can say this because they have won the power. They feel freer to speak about it.
Interesting. I'd like to know who that is. and what part of California. It's an interesting question. Because from what I can tell, especially out in Colorado now, which is experiencing the Californification process, I think most Democrats are still pretty happy with how it's turned out. I think that maybe on a provincial level where they've felt the effects of it, that the negative impact, whether it's economic or security, they're starting to have a little bit of amnesty remorse, maybe. But I think I see more of that on the East Coast, particularly where Democratic mayors are now much more emboldened to speak out about the failed refugee experiment. So where you have influxes of Somalian refugees in Maine, or in other parts of New England, there have been Democratic mayors who have not only vocally protested, or not just locally, but protested to the State Department and to the Obama administration. So I think we're seeing some signs of that. Although I wouldn't say California so much, but that is an interesting question. I mean, I think they pick and choose. It's sort of for most mainstream progressive Democrats, they can pick and choose when they protest the negative consequences of immigration. So that's why occasionally you'll have a Dick Durbin or a Pat Leahy on the side of some marginal reform of a foreign guest worker program or H-1B. And actually, Bernie Sanders is a good example of someone who's spoken the right way on behalf of the American worker, but then had his campaign conversion and completely muted his criticism of H-1B at a time when it should have helped him much more. He hardly made it a showcase. He could have. He would have been a perfect foil for Trump if he had. But it's Trump who had the Disney workers speaking for him, not Bernie Sanders.
Roy?
Inside the conservative movement, I was interested in your presentation at CPAC this winter. Gigantic audience, and you had them really stirred up. But as you have said, the subject of this book is not one that you would have necessarily have embraced a few years ago. You're very concerned about illegal immigration. You were concerned about the crime, a lot of those issues. But sort of the effect on regular workers has taken a little while for you to really grab hold of, really sink your teeth in. We know that at CPAC, leaders of CPAC are, good share of those leaders are not where you are. And a lot of those people in this audience weren't. It's kind of a little bit bold, the way you spoke for this issue. Of course, you had that book. So my question is, how did you feel in the end? Was the reception? What kind of feedback did you get afterwards? Because you were really speaking against a lot of the leaders of the conservative movement when you were talking about taking on those guest books.
It's a great question, Roy, and it was a learning process for me. Partly the time that it took to digest all of that information. And as John and I communicated with each other as we were writing this book, actually when we compiled it all and you saw the finished manuscript, it was almost like, damn, we knew it was bad, but not this bad. And this is a guy who's been in the trenches for some 30 years who was saying this. I think that there is there's a deliberate unwillingness to want to look at the ugly truth on the part of a lot of doctrinaire, free market conservatives. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I had that myself. It was more, I was surrounded by people who wanted to keep repeating the mantra, and you'll see this among, certain segments of the right today. Well, I'm against illegal immigration, but I'm for legal immigration, and there's never any nuance about that. For me, the same kind of analysis that I had applied to invasion is how I came to arrive at where we came to with Sold Out, which is really just doing the very simple task, simple on its face, of asking, are these programs accomplishing what these legislators said that they would do, and what are the actual consequences of them? And then just comparing the rhetoric with the reality. And in no way can you look, as we painted the very vivid picture in Sold Out, can you look at what people said when, just take H-1B for example, was created and enacted, and what promises were made, and what American worker protections were supposedly built into the law. In no way can you look at that and compare it to the reality over the last 25 years and say that this computes. It does not compute. And I think, this book is divided into two halves, and two general halves, and the first part is about H-1B, and then the second big chunk of it is about all of the other programs, and the same thing applies to how all the other programs have been run too. So even for somebody who's not, say, a doctrinaire free market conservative, just somebody who believes in the idea that we should have a quote unquote good government, these programs are failing on all counts. Then, of course, you have to realize, and this is why we included a whole section on following the money trail, is that there are a lot of vested interests, particularly on the big business right, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce right, that are not merely content with looking away and averting their eyes politely at the truth, but are actually have vested interests in lying about it and propagandizing, and that's where my blood starts to really boil. So the response from a lot of my colleagues on the right was to ignore the book, and I think that's the hardest thing to fight, is the sin of omission. But I have pretty big platforms, and we've done as much as we could to try and spread the word and get it out there. Been surprised that even some of the media organizations that I've had long affiliations with that are very much against what we've had to say, and in fact are targeted in the book, like Rupert Murdoch's Fox News channel, had me on to talk about it. Sometimes in an obligatory way for a couple of minutes or so, but that's all I need to try and get the message out there. John and I had a big opinion piece in the New York Post, owned by Rupert Murdoch as well. But I think it's really the alternative channels of getting the book out that have helped us the most. For example, an hour-long joint appearance that we had on C-SPAN, which I think provoked the most response. And you know how they divide the lines up between liberal, conservative, and independent callers. And I joked that it was a kumbaya moment because almost every single caller on each line agreed with what we had to say, that there is a point of consensus that we're reaching on this, and it's gratifying.
Thank you. A couple more? Yeah, Ken?
Recently, 4 attorneys for the government outright lied to a federal judge in furtherance of a constitutionally questionable scheme. I see this as an attack on the fundamentals of the United States as much as on immigration. Do you have any comments on that?
Absolutely.
This is the Texas v. U.S. lawsuit.
Right.
I got to interrupt.
What?
I'm the canary in the coal mine. I didn't bring my hearing aids to this.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I heard him.
Sorry, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not missing other questions.
Yeah, Kent was asking about the the judge chastising the Justice Department lawyers who lied to him in the U.S. v. Texas DACA lawsuit.
Right, and there was actually a follow-up yesterday where it appears that they're still defying the judge's order, and that there were untold numbers of even more approvals in the wake of that tongue lashing from Judge Hannon. I want to juxtapose that with an article that was in the New York Times today. I can't remember the exact headline, but it said something like, it was this dire apocalyptic warning that a Trump administration threatens the rule of law, comma, scholars say. So, the specter of, whatever imagined acts of administration tyranny that Trump would be responsible for, compared to not just this one act, and not just with regard to immigration, but the plain fascism that we've experienced under Obama is astonishing. It's happened with regard to the environment. It's happened with regard to some of these decisions that benefited certain businesses and labor unions under the bailouts. It's happened with the IRS witch hunts.
Obamacare.
And Obamacare. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I think what's extraordinary, obviously, was the judicial opinion from Hannon. And John was just mentioning that Judge Hannon absolutely belongs on Trump's short list for the Supreme Court. Why he was omitted might be a story. I don't know. He should have been at the top of the list.
Jim?
Michelle, Jim Robb from Numbers. I was just wondering if you could give a little more detail of how much you believe the immigration issue is going to drive the presidential campaign, and what you think is going to happen to the Bernie voters if they do nominate Hillary.
Just the question, to repeat it, was what's the role of the immigration in the presidential campaign, and where does she think the Bernie voters will go?
Well, obviously, if not for Trump's very wise decision to make, at the time, remember what it was the border surge, the orchestrated manufactured crisis by the Obama administration, and of course that summer, the murder of Kate Steinle in San Francisco. I think that this shows just how stupid the Republican Party non-leader leadership has been over decades. And it is the number one reason why the decrepit GOP is in the trouble that it's in. I wrote this column several years ago after the 2012 postmortems that the RNC issued, where they basically told people like me and you that we should shut up. And I mentioned the Jamil Shaw family, and on Twitter, Jamil Shaw's father had tried to get the attention of Reince Priebus after they put out that post-mortem. Because Reince Priebus made a big deal out of wanting to go on a listening tour. He was going to go on a listening tour and hear from people. And here was Jamil Shaw saying, ooh, could you come to LA and listen to me? I've got something to tell you. And Reince Priebus didn't even bother to answer the tweet. And so I was a troll, okay? I'm really good at being a Twitter troll. Like, hey, let me introduce you. And I kept tweeting him, nothing. So what happens 4 years later? It's Donald Trump who has Jamil Shaw's father up on stage with all of these other families of victims of non-enforcement. All of the members of the Remembrance Project. The family of David March, who I profiled in Invasion, was an LA deputy who was shot by an illegal alien who had been a beneficiary of catch and release policies. And they're still not listening. So the problem is it's not just on the illegal immigration side. I mean, why did Ted Cruz lose? Well, he had an opportunity to reach out to those Disney workers or those Southern California Edison workers or the workers at Abbott Labs who were laid off and forced to train their H-1B replacements as a condition of getting severance, and he didn't do it. He was only forced to talk about it. It was not something he really, really cared about. And so when some of my friends ask me, well, is Trump just going to change his mind like he changes his mind on so many other things? Like, is he going to be as mercurial on this issue of immigration? I don't think so. I mean, I sat and watched one of these rallies where he connected with those people. He gets it. And that's all they've ever wanted, is for some politician to do something other than pander to illegal alien dreamers, that there are Americans who are dreamers too. As far as Bernie Sanders voters, I don't know what the hell they're going to do. Yeah, but I've got to imagine that there are some of them who've been affected by these open borders policies, who will have no problem pulling a lever or writing Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, that it's going to be a much easier decision than people think it's going to be.
Let's take one last question. Yep, Steve.
Hi, good to see you.
You know, your work on H-1B and the tech industry is fantastic. What's interesting to me is there is some media discussion of this impact, right? And even some liberals, Economic Policy Institute, although they took heed, will put out a study saying, hey, this is a real problem and so forth. But what's so striking about that to me is if you look at college graduates in the U.S. labor market, well, they've struggled. They haven't done as well as they were. And in the tech sector, you see no wage growth, all the things that which certainly demonstrate no labor shortage. But boy, at the bottom end of the labor market, things look incredibly bad, right? You've got lots of segments of young and less educated people where a majority don't even work anymore, where their real wages have declined 10 to 20% over the last 30 years. And that's where immigration has a really big impact, a large fraction illegal, large fraction legal. And yet that doesn't rest anywhere near as much, even though in some ways the evidence is really powerful. Things look terrible at the bottom end of the U.S. labor market, where they just look not so great at the top end.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that no one sort of gives a darn about that, even though the numbers are so powerful there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Although even there, you see some glimmers of awareness in some pockets of the media that you wouldn't expect. BuzzFeed did a piece. Actually, it's a series now. I think they've done 2 on H-2B. My caveat about that is they always approach it from the perspective, though, of the exploited workers, the exploited foreign workers, because that is the progressive impulse. Is because America is a bad, evil place, it's always about the consequences on foreigners, as opposed to looking at what's happening to the people here who've been either displaced or grieved. And that's similarly the San Jose Mercury News, which did the big piece a couple of weeks ago on Elon Musk's factory workers, the Eastern European factory workers. You know, again, the equation was more about the impact on them. There's a lawsuit now. Some of the foreign workers are suing for back wages, and I think one of them was injured. But never looking at the flip side of that, even though it's not theoretical, you know? Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to respect everybody's time. I mean, this is a work day. I don't know if you guys have to get to work, but I do. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, Michelle, for all you do. And we'll see you a year from now.